White is one of the most famous children's authors of all time. He is known as an American writer and essayist. E.B. White's early life. E.B. White's full name is Elwyn Brooks White. He was the sixth and youngest child to be born to Samuel Tilly White and Jessie Hart. He was born on July 11th, 1899 in Mount Vernon, New York. He never liked his name, Elwyn Brooks, and he always joked that his mother had run out of names by the time they got to their sixth child, so that's why his name was Elwyn. He grew up with 2 brothers and 3 sisters. All of their children attended local public schools in Mount Vernon. The Whites were not wealthy, but they were well off enough that White was able to decide wherever he wanted to go to university. E.B. White's later life. White decided to go to Cornell University. While there, he worked as a journalist for the school newspaper. He gained some fame off of that because his articles were just so good. But while in college, he used the nickname Andy because he still did not like his name, Elwyn Brooks. He graduated from Cornell University in 1921. He was in the top group of his class. One thing that greatly influenced Elwyn Brooks White was Henry David Thoreau and his book Walden. Thoreau's Walden is about getting away from society and living in nature. And Elwyn took that advice and he went and lived out of society for a while. After he got done living out of society and after university, he went to work for the United Press and the Seattle Times. But eventually, he was given a job at the New Yorker. He was one of their best reporters, but he always wrote his articles under a pseudonym. He used the name Lee Strout White because at this point in time, he still didn't like his birth name, Elwyn Brooks White. While working for the New Yorker, he met a girl named Catherine. Elwyn and Catherine were married in 1929 and had many happy years together. Now, most people know that Elwyn Brooks White is famous for his child books, but he also has adult literature as well. Elwyn Brooks White was honored to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1963 for his contribution to literature. Elwyn died on October 1st, 1985 in North Brooklyn, Maine, in his farm. He was suffering from Alzheimer's disease and was also devastated by the loss of his wife just a few years earlier. His Alzheimer's and the loss of his wife together led to his death. Elwyn Brooks White had some interesting beliefs about Christianity. As a young child, he had been taught by his dad that he was just saved from birth. Therefore, no one truly knows if Elwyn Brooks White was saved or a Christian or not. He has no public profession of faith. But we do know that Elwyn Brooks White once said that he was skeptical about organized religion and advocated a respect for nature and simple living, which is why he loved Henry David Thoreau's Walden as much as he did and why that influenced his life in such a great way. Now, most people know about Elwyn Brooks White's children's literature, but not everyone knows about his adult literature. The first adult book that he wrote was The Wild Flag, which was written in 1946. His next adult literature was Here is New York. This was actually an essay written in 1948, but it later was rewritten into a book describing the life of New York City. His next book was The Second Tree from the Corner, written in 1954. This was written describing his little apartment with his wife that they lived in. It was written right before they moved to their new farm. His next book is not actually his own, but one that he rewrote to better help future authors. It's The Elements of Style, which was written in 1955. The Elements of Style gives advice and inspires many future generations of writers to come. Elwyn Brooks White read this book while he was in college, and once he graduated and had become successful, he decided that he wanted to redo this book to give more advice to authors now that he had been in their place. His next book was The Points of My Compass, written in 1962. Elwyn Brooks White's final adult literature was The Lady is Cold. This was actually a poetry collection, and though White was not very good with poetry, he decided to try it anyways because he wanted to be versed in all areas of literature. Now, we will talk about White's most famous literature, children's literature. His very first child's book was Stuart Little. Stuart Little is the story of a little mouse who was born to a human family in New York City. It shows how Stuart had to go through life as different. People would bully him or be mean to him, and he had to learn how to react to that. Stuart Little really helps children to know that it's okay to be different in the world. You don't have to be just like everyone else. Stuart Little was White's first children's book, and it was illustrated by Garth Williams. The illustrations in this book really helped to add so much detail and help the children to piece together little pieces of story that they might have missed if there were no pictures. Stuart Little has become a classic in children's literature. Children today still love to sit down and read Stuart Little, or even watch the movie that's been made out of it. His next book, probably his most famous book, is Charlotte's Web. Charlotte's Web is about Wilbur, a spring pig who is the runt of his litter, which means he is destined to die. But Fern, the farmer's daughter, does everything she can to save him, and Wilbur's allowed to go live with the other animals in the barn. But later, Wilbur's life is in jeopardy again, and Charlotte the spider and all of the other farm animals work together to save his life. White actually got his inspiration from this book when he spotted a spider spinning an egg sac in his barn in Maine. Just seeing that, he was able to get everything he needed to write all of Charlotte's Web. Charlotte's Web is definitely an award-winning book. The very first award that Charlotte's Web won was the Hornbook Fanfare Award. It was awarded this one in 1952. The Hornbook Fanfare Award is a selection of the best children's and young adults book each year, and Charlotte's Web was able to receive this award in 1952. The next award that Charlotte's Web won was the Newbery Honor Award. It received this one in 1953. The Newbery Honor Award is given once a year to a book written for children under 15. There are many books written for children under 15 every single year, and Charlotte's Web was awarded this award in 1953, which was a great honor. The next award that was given to Charlotte's Web was the George C. Stone Center for Children's Book Recognition of Merit Award. This one it received in 1970. The George C. Stone Center for Children's Book Recognition of Merit Award is awarded to any book that has the capacity to arouse in children an awareness of the complexity and beauty of the expanding universe. Not many books receive this award, but Charlotte's Web was one of them, and it's just one reason that it's an award-winning book. The next award that E.B. White and Charlotte's Web were awarded was the Laura Ingalls Wilder Award. It received this one in 1970. The Laura Ingalls Wilder Award is awarded to an author or illustrator of a children's book that are popular over a long time. And as we all know, Charlotte's Web has been popular for many years, as children today still love to read it. The final award that was given to Charlotte's Web is the Massachusetts Children's Book Award. It received this one in 1984, right before White died. The Massachusetts Children's Book Award is given to books that promote reading for pleasure among students in grades 4 through 6. Like Stuart Little, Charlotte's Web was also illustrated by Garth Williams, and as well, it just gives the story so much more meaning to it, as you can see a picture of what White meant as he goes through the story. The children are just able to piece together more parts of the story. Charlotte's Web is definitely considered a classic, as children in the 1900s and now in the 2000s love to read and enjoy that book, or even watch the movie that has come from the book. The The final children's book that White wrote was Trumpet of the Swan. Trumpet of the Swan tells the story of Louis, a trumpeter swan who was born with no voice. Louis has to adapt to an environment where he's not like everyone else, but he learns to play a trumpet in order to impress the most beautiful swan of all, Serena. This book has a similar theme to Stuart Little in that it's okay to be different and it's okay to find a different way to make your voice be heard than everyone else's. It's okay to stand out. And I think that's a very important lesson for children to learn, is that it's okay to be different. Especially as a Christian, we should be different. Trumpet of the Swan was published in 1970, and it was White's very last children's book that he wrote. Trumpet of the Swan was illustrated by Edward Fascino, and the illustrations in this book are beautiful. Swans are amazing creatures, and just the detail and beauty that Edward Fascino gave these swans is incredible. It helps children as they read to see the swans and see Louis as he's going through his hard life. Trumpet of the Swan is just another classic piece of literature that was written by E.B. White. Charlotte's Web is definitely E.B. White's most famous book. Charlotte's Web tells the story of Wilbur, the spring pig, who's destined to die, but then the animals and Fern twice have to save his life. And here's one way that they help save his life. The next day was foggy. Everything on the farm was dripping wet. The grass looked like a magic carpet. The asparagus patch looked like a silver forest. On foggy mornings, Charlotte's Web was truly a thing of beauty. This morning, each thin strand was decorated with dozens of tiny beads of water. The web glistened in the light and made a pattern of loveliness and mystery like a delicate veil. Even Lurvy, who wasn't particularly interested in beauty, noticed the web when he came with the pig's breakfast. He noted how clearly it showed up, and he noted how big and carefully built it was. And then he took another look, and he saw something that made him set his pail down. There, in the center of the web, neatly woven in block letters, was a message. It said, "Some pig." Lurvy felt weak. He brushed his hand across his eyes and stared harder at Charlotte's Web. "I'm seeing things," he whispered. He dropped to his knees and uttered a short prayer. Then, forgetting all about Wilbur's breakfast, he walked back to the house and called Mr. Zuckerman. "I think you'd better come down to the pig pen," he said. "What's the trouble?" asked Mr. Zuckerman. "Anything wrong with the pig?" Not exactly," said Lurvy. "Come and see for yourself." The two men walked silently down to Wilbur's yard. Lurvy pointed to the spider's web. "Do you see what I see?" he asked. Zuckerman stared at the writing on the web. Then he murmured the words, "Some pig?" Then he looked at Lurvy. Then they both began to tremble. Charlotte, sleepy after her night's exertions, smiled as she watched. Wilbur came and stood directly under the web. "Some pig," muttered Lurvy in a low voice. "Some pig," whispered Mr. Zuckerman. They stared and stared for a long time at Wilbur. Then they stared at Charlotte. "You don't suppose that spider," began Mr. Zuckerman, but he shook his head and didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he walked solemnly back up to the house and spoke to his wife. "Edith, something has happened," he said in a weak voice. He went into the living room and sat down, and Mrs. Zuckerman followed. "I've got something to tell you, Edith," he said. "You better sit down." Mrs. Zuckerman sank into a chair. She looked pale and frightened. "Edith," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I think you had best be told that we have a very unusual pig." A look of complete bewilderment came over Mrs. Zuckerman's face. "Homer Zuckerman, what in the world are you talking about?" she said. "This is a very serious thing, Edith," he replied. "Our pig is completely out of the ordinary." "What's unusual about the pig?" asked Mrs. Zuckerman, who was beginning to recover from her scare. "Well, I don't really know yet," said Mr. Zuckerman, "but we have received a sign, Edith, a mysterious sign. A miracle has happened on this farm. There was a large spider's web in the doorway of the barn cellar, right over the pig pen, and when Lurvy went to feed the pig this morning, he noticed the web because it was foggy. And you know how a spider's web looks very distinct in a fog. And right spang, in the middle of the web, there were the words, "Some pig." The words were woven right into the web. They were actually part of the web, Edith. I know because I've been down there and seen them. It says, "Some pig," just as clear can be. There can be no mistake about it. A miracle has happened, and a sign has occurred here on earth, right on our farm, and we have no ordinary pig. "Well," said Mrs. Zuckerman, "it seems to me you're a little off. It seems to me we have no ordinary spider." "Oh no," said Zuckerman, "it's the pig that's unusual. It says so right there in the middle of the web."